Why hello there friends, it's Emma here, the Bookish Princess. Welcome to yet another Top Reads of the Year video. This is the 7th, I think, that I've done on my channel. I started in 2015 doing a Top Reads of the Year video. They're really fun actually to look back and remember what were the most memorable books that stood out. So these aren't books that came out this year, these are just books that I read this year. I have done a reading vlog every month, so if you've watched those, you will remember these titles. Every year I say to myself, now Emma, you don't have to match the number to the year. You could just do top 10 of 2021. But then I start making the list and it has a sort of awkward number like 16 or 17, and it feels like once I'm at 17, I might as well just go all the way to 21. I will link my top reads of the year videos from past years in the description, so you can check them out if you want to. And obviously, if you're not yet subscribed, you should hit that button. I post brand new videos every Friday, and I have some very exciting bookish content coming up in the new year. I did divide these up into sections. So first, we're going to have sort of poetry and plays, and then we have fiction, children's fiction, and nonfiction. I have my stack here. Some of these books that I read were ebooks, so the stack is not 21 books large, but let's get into it. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the list. I thought in the number 1 slot, I would put Cymbeline. This is a play by Shakespeare. You'll have heard me talking about my Shakespeare project that I did this past year. Back at the beginning of the decade, I did a 20 classics to read throughout the 2020s list video. And one of the things that I wanted to get to were Shakespeare plays that I was not very familiar with. A lot of the histories I'd never read, I'd never seen performed. So I made myself a list of 12 Shakespeare plays and I read them throughout 2021, roughly one a month. I would say Cymbeline was my favorite. I think it had the most engaging plot and engaging characters, the most cohesive plot as well. Of course, all of the plays I read had beautiful language and beautiful writing. Cymbeline does stand out as special because that was the play I was reading when I found a kitten randomly outside my farmhouse. I wasn't sure if it was a boy or a girl, and Cymbeline just seemed to fit. The name just seemed to fit. It turned out it was a girl, and Cymbeline in the play is the king of Britain, but she's just Queen Cymbeline. It was an excellent play, and I'm really glad I went and dove into the histories. I did Richard II, the 2 Henry IV, the 3 Henry VI, Henry VIII. Cymbeline was also a British royalty play. In this play, Cymbeline is a king of Britain when Rome was still a power and Britain was kind of a Roman province. We meet Cymbeline's daughter who is hoping to marry the man she loves. There are 2 mysterious sons who disappeared when they were young. There's an evil, scheming stepmother. It was a very memorable year for Shakespeare, but I thought, you know, I would only give it 1 slot on the 21 list, and I think that slot has to be given to Cymbeline. The next 3 slots on my list are given to the same author, and this was another multi-month reading project that you will have heard me talking about. I think I started it back when my hammock was still up over the summer, but I had to put Dante's 3 works from the Divine Comedy, Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. So technically I'm not quite finished with Paradiso yet. I have read quite a bit of it. We'll see. Maybe I'll be able to finish it up before the end of the year. In any case, I will be telling you guys about it during my January reading vlog. But Inferno and Purgatorio I did finish up, and I just have really enjoyed this. This is, of course, the Dorothy Sayers translation. Dorothy Sayers is one of my favorite authors. Her Lord Peter mysteries are up in the top corner up there. I have always loved her Lord Peter mysteries. I also love her Letters to a Diminished Church, which I reread this year. I was tempted to put that on this list, but I think it was on last year's list. So I thought, well, it shouldn't be on the top reads of the list 2 years in a row. That's probably a little cheating. And anyway, Dorothy Sayers technically does get 3 spots on the list. She has such excellent notes giving you like the historical background, but also kind of giving you her take on the story. It feels like reading the Divine Comedy with a friend. With a really smart friend who has read all the scholarship and just loves Dante so much. You feel like Dante's your friend because obviously he's Dorothy Sayers' friend. And I really love how she talks about how, obviously he is putting real people into hell and purgatory, and especially people of his time would have recognized these names. But also, it's really an allegory, and it is about the journey of a soul through all these different temptations, all these different trials, and it's about the sins that we can all fall prey to, and how we can really imprison ourselves in hell by our own choice. That's what all the souls in hell are there for, which is why I actually enjoyed Purgatorio and Paradiso much more, because everyone is like striving upwards, striving to get up the mountain. I think I was reading online that sometimes people stop at Inferno, and it's like, why would you do that? The whole point is to get up to Paradiso. You gotta keep reading. If you've been thinking of trying Dante, I think Dorothy Sayers is an excellent guide. She's the excellent Virgil to your Dante. So we're moving into our fiction part of the list. The first one is a book that I read back in January. It's called Near Neighbors by Molly Clavering. It's set in Scotland. It's about, as the title suggests, some near neighbors. There's an elderly lady who ends up befriending the family next door, and you also get to know some of the other neighbors. And it just has such a great broad cast of characters. Like, you have a young girl in school, kind of coming of age. You have her older sisters. They all have really charming names. You have her mother, and then you have the elderly lady next door, and it's just such a great slice of life. I believe that Molly Clavering was a friend of D.E. Stevenson, who is one of my favorite authors. She wrote Miss Bunkle's book. She's just such a delight. And if you like D.E. Stevenson, you will certainly like Molly Clavering. I also have to look up more books by this publisher, because I think they put out other neat British authors who I think I would very much enjoy, but Near Neighbors was a sheer delight. P.G. Wodehouse is one of those authors who very frequently appears on my top reads of the year list because he is one of my favorite authors. This year, I loved reading Summer Lightning. I read it during the summer, and I took it out with me to the lake one day, and there was a beautiful sunset. And reading P.G. Wodehouse's evocative summer descriptions of just a sort of lazy summer day at a country estate in Great Britain is so charming. I really liked in this how he kind of juxtaposed the coming of this summer storm with this summer lightning with the sort of growing troubles at Blandings Castle, because Summer Lightning does take us to the wonderful Blandings Castle. We have Lady Constance Keble, Lord Emsworth, the Honourable Galahad Threepwood writing his memoirs, and all of the peerage are shaking in their boots. I like how in P.G. Wodehouse the troubles are always more like absurdities. They're always very silly troubles, but it's just so hilarious, and his writing style is one of a kind, fantastic. Next up, we have The Rosemary Tree by Elizabeth Goudge. Now, it's kind of funny because I've read a lot of Elizabeth Goudge. Again, she's one of my favorite authors. She has appeared on my top reads of the list videos many times. This, I would not actually say, is one of my favorite Goudge books. I hadn't read it before. It was my first time reading it, and I'm really glad I read it. But I feel a little silly putting it on this list because I personally would recommend City of Bells or Scent of Water or the Damaroche trilogy rather than this to start with. But it definitely has stuck in my mind, and there are so many scenes that I've thought about long after I read it that I felt like it deserved a spot here. And one of the most fascinating things about it was that it had what I think is the only unredeemed character in all of Elizabeth Goudge. One of the fun things about her characters is that even the bad ones, there's some spark of goodness that you can see and you can root for, and you can see their journey's not over. Hopefully they'll make it to goodness, but there was a character in this one. So I'll give the spoiler warning. Skip ahead if you don't want it spoiled. I mean, you kind of can see that she's evil almost as soon as you meet her, so I feel like this isn't much of a spoiler. But in case you don't want it, skip ahead. This cruel old lady who has this sugary sweet exterior, but in the inside is just rotten to the core. She is ill, and she's obviously about to die. And she has this little dog who she really just kept as kind of a status symbol, or just kind of for her own comfort. And so she hasn't been kind to him because he, I think, is ill too, and she's ill. But anyway, she kicks him, and she hears this voice saying, "Call the dog out from under the bed." Give the dog some love. But she ignores the voice, and then shortly after that she dies. And that was obviously God giving her this one last chance to show me a spark of goodness. And it was a couple months after I read this that Cymbeline showed up in the tree. Yeah, I would never have been cruel like the lady in this book, no matter what. I would have found her a home. If I hadn't been able to care for her, I would have made sure she had a safe home somewhere else. But especially having just read this, it made me feel like, I can handle this. Don't worry, I got this. It's all good. Don't worry, God, you can trust me with this kitten. But yeah, I just thought that was so interesting because I feel like as a character, this is kind of one of a kind in Guj. So the next one, I honestly had a hard time picking just one title, but I felt like this didn't deserve 5 spots on my list. It was, again, another multi-month reading project. I really wanted to read the Thrawn Trilogy by Timothy Zahn. I enjoyed it so much. And once I finished it, I realized there's a duology, The Hand of Thrawn, that comes after it. And so I ended up getting ebooks of those. I believe they're narrated by Mark Thompson. They're such good ebooks, though. There's obviously a ton of production time put into it, like all sorts of, Star Trek noises and the droid whistles and like really interesting voices for the aliens, because there are some really interesting aliens, especially in the Thrawn duology and The Hand of Thrawn. I just really enjoyed this world. It was very immersive, great plots, true to the Star Wars feeling. If you guys remember my Last Jedi video, then you remember that I'm not really a fan of Disney's Star Wars, but this is like true blue Star Wars, and so fun to see the characters again, and they all feel like themselves. So many great additions. Mara Jade, so cool. And just like the imagination of Zahn. If I had to pick one favorite, it might have been Dark Force Rising, just because I liked what Dark Force was. I thought it was like a great, really exciting twist. But I do feel like it was kind of a complete experience, so it's definitely worth reading the whole trilogy, reading the duology, and Zahn published a new Thrawn book not too long ago, so I'll have to get to that, see if I can get to that in 2022. This next fiction book was a recommendation from my brother Porthos. This one I actually just finished reading this past month. I really enjoyed it, though. It's called Napoleon of Notting Hill by G.K. Chesterton. I mentioned in my December reading vlog, it's more on the poet and the lunatics end of things, so like more on the Father Brown end of things rather than the Man Who Was Thursday the end of things, because I feel like that's a little bit more abstract and metaphysical. And this, I thought it was going to be like that for the first couple of chapters, but then it did get a really concrete plot, very exciting. Like, I ended up reading it really quickly. I wasn't sure where it was going to go. The Poet and the Lunatics by G.K. Chesterton is one of my favorite books by him, and it really reminded me of that. In fact, there was definitely like a poet and a lunatic character, so it was fun reading it and remembering that other book that I love so much. I have a couple books on my list that I read for the Booty You Readathon, which I do in October. My Frontierland book I got on my Kindle, but I liked it so much that when I saw a physical copy of the sequel called Rainbow Trail by Zane Grey, I ended up buying this. But the book is The Riders of the Purple Sage by Zane Grey. It's Zane Grey's most famous and most popular book. Excellent Frontierland vibes. Takes you out to Utah border territory, and this community of Mormons is trying to pressure one of the members into marrying a man she doesn't want to. But this rider comes out from the Purple Sage, and she ends up getting some help from him. Really exciting plot. Like, I think I kept reading really quickly because I didn't know where it was going to go, and I was just so excited. It was almost like a mystery, but like it didn't have the sort of dread and like of, a murder. It was just like action, and one of the characters ends up exploring this crazy twisted canyon system, which I think there's a picture of the canyon, because we revisit the canyon, I believe, in the Rainbow Trail. Yeah, there it is right there. So I'm excited to get to this in 2022. One good book always leads to another good book, right? This next book, I couldn't decide if it was a children's book or an adult book. I think you would love it if you're an adult, but I think it could also be a children's book. It's Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. I hadn't read a Jules Verne in a while. I have read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and I enjoyed that. So it's fun to come back to Jules Verne. This was another Booty You book. This was my Grand Circle tour. It was inspired by the Magic Kingdom Railroad, and he does obviously take a train, takes boats, takes elephants. There's a fun juxtaposition between Phileas Fogg, who made the bet and is trying to get around the world in 80 days, and so he is constantly just looking at his timetable, like, he's a very methodical person, and he's just, trying to make the next connection and not really admiring the things around him. But then his manservant, Pasipo too, is like, marveling at the world and marveling at all of these crazy places they're going. This is one of those titles that I'd heard for ages but never taken the time to sit down and read, and I'm so glad I did. This year I broke in these Virago Modern Classics editions of Ella Montgomery's Anne of Green Gables books. I have a bunch of the sequels. They are also in that corner shelf. It is Dorothy Sayers, Laura Ingalls Wilder, and then we have the Ella Montgomery shelf. I decided I would give 2 slots to the Anne of Green Gables sequels. I loved Rainbow Valley. This was just so sweet. Anne's children are fairly young and they're growing up, and there's a new minister, Reverend John Meredith, who arrives, and he has his own little batch of children. Their mother has passed away, so they're a little bit rambunctious, and it was just so fun to see Anne's children and the children at the manse. And I really liked the kind of plot line that was woven in behind all of these fun stories of life at Four Winds. Now, in the sequels, there are some sort of premonitions of World War I and some tragedy coming to the family, so I knew that that was coming when I got to the final sequel, Rilla of Ingleside. Rilla is the youngest child, and so she's 15 or 16, really coming of age in this novel when the war suddenly kind of crashes her whole world. I thought I wasn't going to like it as much as the others because I knew it was going to have a more serious tone, but actually I really enjoyed it. It was so immersive, the way, you know, the family is following battle by battle by battle. It just made you feel like you're living in Canada with the family, you know, waiting for news and going through each step of the war, and like seeing the way the community reacts and seeing all the adventures that Rilla gets up to and the way she really comes into her own and develops her character. It definitely had a different feel from, say, Rainbow Valley, but I read it really quickly because I was enjoying it so much. Definitely fun to spend some time with Anne of Green Gables this year. Next up, we have Ballet Shoes by Noelle Streatfeild. This is mentioned in that movie, that Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks movie. They mentioned the Shoes books because I think there was like theater shoes and skating shoes. They're not all necessarily a sequel, although I think some of the same characters do appear, but it had been a long time since I last reread Ballet Shoes, and it's just such a charming story. You have these 3 little orphans that this very eccentric archaeologist, paleontologist picked up. He's not at home very much, but he brought them home for his niece and her nanny who lives with them to take care of, and Gum, I think they call him, Great Uncle Matthew. Pauline, Petrova, and Posy are the names of the 3 little girls, and they don't actually know Gum because he's not there when they're growing up, and the money starts running short. They have this beautiful old house in London. So they start taking in boarders, and it's so fun to get to know the boarders. One of them works for the dancing school and suggests that the little girls come to the dancing school, and so you really get to see that world and see them, you know, going for auditions. I loved hearing about how they tried to contrive their audition dresses because, like, they obviously wanted to look nice for auditions, but there's not a lot of money, so they like really were trying to get nice dresses just for the auditions, dresses that they could share. Just a delight. All right, we're moving into the nonfiction books. I read this book back during Lent. It's The Biblical World, an Illustrated Atlas by Jean-Pierre Isbouts. It's a National Geographic publication. My dad recommended it, and actually we found this author does a program. I think we found it on Amazon Prime, where he like talks about a lot of the same research, and like he has a lot of the same photos and of artifacts and locations. This was just a really fascinating look at the world of the Bible and, you know, the findings of archaeology and how they, you know, kind of stack up against what's in the Bible, and just putting everything in context and like putting them all on the map. It was just so fascinating because I'm a Roman Catholic, and, you know, I go to Mass every week, and we hear the readings from the Old Testament and New Testament, seeing where Christ lived, seeing, you know, where the Jews of the Old Testament traveled to, and the different powers that came to be, and, you know, how they lived. Just really fascinating. Kind of helps you see your faith in a new light when, you know, look at a map of the Sea of Galilee and see, oh, well, there was Nazareth, and here's what was happening, you know, when Jesus was born and was growing up. One of the most interesting points he makes is that Jesus in the Bible tells many parables about farming. And in Nazareth, you know, by the Sea of Galilee, it was very fertile. And so almost everybody had something to do with farming. And so this author is talking about how Jesus was almost certainly a farmer, you know, if only part-time. So when he told those parables, he really knew what he was talking about. Just really fun to dive more into history. I read 2 books by Laura Ingalls Wilder this year. One was a reread. It was Farmer Boy, which is one of my all-time favorite books. It's just so charming, so adorable. I read that for middle Belgrade March, and I almost put that on the list, but then I thought, well, maybe I should put something that was a new to me book this year, and I also really enjoyed this one. It was West from Home, Letters of Laura Ingalls Wilder. So she went to visit her daughter Rose in San Francisco, and the 1915 World's Fair was going on, and she wrote all of these letters back to her husband Almanzo, and it's just so fascinating. They give such a cool portrait of the fair and Laura's train journey, and just like family things, Rose writing for the paper. I think there were some amazing scones at the fair, and there were some photos of the fair, and I'd never read much about it. It's just fun to kind of picture a sort of Disney World of 1915 that people traveled to see. And it's always fun to read sort of lesser works or letters or nonfiction by an author you love. Another favorite author who I learned more about this year was Elizabeth Goudge. I read The World of Elizabeth Goudge by Sylvia Gower. So this is kind of a biography of Elizabeth Goudge, but also really looking closely at places that inspired her books. And they're almost all places that she lived or visited. And so the author went and visited those places herself and talks about her experience. Definitely makes me want to travel. Definitely makes me want to start planning an itinerary for the next time I go to Great Britain. I have been to a couple of these places. I did go to Ely, which is the inspiration for the Dean's Watch city, and Elizabeth Goudge did live in Ely growing up. But yes, if you love Elizabeth Goudge, this is just such a treat. And the publisher is Girls Gone By. They publish paperbacks of a lot of Elizabeth Goudge's children's books that can be hard to find. Whenever I put together these videos, I always kind of go back and rewatch my reading blogs to remind myself what was I reading back in January and February. And one book that I finished up at the beginning of the year, but it was really good, was The Memoirs of Lady Hyejeong. So this is a Korean classic written by a princess of Korea, Lady Hyejeong. She was married to the Crown Prince Sado, who was unfortunately insane. And she wrote these 3 documents about her life with Prince Sado, and they were meant for 3 different audiences. The ebook edition that I had some great notes kind of explaining who everybody is, because it was one of those cases where you had to memorize the names, and sometimes somebody was referred to by a different name. But also they talked about who the different documents were for. But I just thought all of them were really extraordinary, because obviously she lived an incredibly difficult, stressful life in the royal court. With her husband is crazy, so she's kind of caught between her husband and the rest of the court. In the memoirs, she obviously tries to be fair to everybody. She did love her husband, and she kind of tries to defend her husband, and her father-in-law, the king, obviously had his own mental problems and definitely did not help his son. And so she talks about that honestly, but she also obviously loved her father-in-law and kind of defends him as well. Reading it, I felt like she must have been a very impressive lady to have gotten through the life that she had to lead and to still be able to kind of give a coherent account of it, because I guess it was kind of mysterious. Obviously it all happened in the court, and people are like, was Sado really crazy? Did the king just make up an excuse to kill his son? Or was Sado just completely evil? But Lady Hyejeong gives a really kind of balanced portrait of it. A lot of the K-dramas that I like to watch, deal with the Joseon dynasty. So this was during the Joseon dynasty. So it was interesting to learn more about that period and more about the history of Korea. Another author who it is traditional to have on these end of the year lists is Osa Johnson. And this year I did read a new Osa Johnson, new to me, The Last Adventure. This was about her final trip with her husband Martin to Borneo. I did read this for the Booty Readathon. It was my Jungle Cruise inspired pick. It was an excellent Jungle Cruise pick, because they do really explore the river, whose name I don't think I could pronounce. They build a little village alongside the river so that they're able to go up and really deep, penetrate deep into the jungle and take these incredible photographs. The book does have some of the photographs. There's Osa with one of her pet gibbon apes, I think. Martin and Osa were just such extraordinary people. They were travel photographers and filmmakers in the 20s and 30s, and so they went to these really remote locations with, all of this heavy equipment and captured the first images and brought them back home. And I think they were really well known in the 20s and 30s. They're not as well known today. I feel like they deserve to be more well known because they're so neat. There's a Martin and Osa Safari Museum in Chinook, Kansas, where Martin and Osa are from. And since I've mentioned Osa Johnson on my channel, I've been in touch with them for the past couple of years, and they had some extra books, and so they sent this my way. And it's just been really fun to read. Gotta love Martin and Osa. So I'm realizing that one of these last 2 books is actually not nonfiction, but it went with the last book. which is why I mistakenly grouped it together. It's translated fiction. This is the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna's Counsel in Time of War, translated by Barbara Stoller Miller. This is the copy that I read back in college, and my college notes were in it and underlined bits, so that was kind of interesting to see my old thoughts. But it was really neat to reread this. Such a thought-provoking tale, and definitely very mystical, very lyrical though, like very beautiful, lots of beautiful imagery and beautiful metaphors. The last afterword is a little essay entitled, Why Did Henry David Thoreau Take the Bhagavad Gita to Walden Pond? And it was, in fact, Henry David Thoreau who inspired me to reread the Bhagavad Gita this year. I thought Walden would be a good book to close this list out with. I read this starting in the spring and then kind of throughout most of the summer, although there are winter and fall scenes in it as well. It's just a beautiful affirmation of life, affirmation of nature, and striving to carve out your own path through life. He's living out in this cabin by the woods, but he brought some books with him. He brought the Bhagavad Gita, and he quotes that. He quotes Confucius. So I think it's neat how he almost brings the whole world into his little cabin by Walden Pond. But he has lots of really beautiful reflections, and the way he looks at the world around him too. Beautiful descriptions of the fish in the pond, or a battle between ants or bees, or the way he talks about the fire is so beautiful. It is remarkable how easily and insensibly we fall into a particular route and make a beaten track for ourselves. I had not lived at Walden a week before my feet wore a path from my door to the pond side, and though it is 5 or 6 years since I trod it, it is still quite distinct. It is true, I fear that others may have fallen into it, and so helped to keep it open. The surface of the earth is soft and impressible by the feet of men, and so with the paths which the mind travels. How worn and dusty, then, must be the highways of the world, how deep the ruts of tradition and conformity. I did not wish to take a cabin passage, but rather to go before the mast and on the deck of the world, for there I could best see the moonlight and the mountains. I do not wish to go below now. Just so many beautiful thoughts and really inspiring thoughts. Walden is definitely worth the time if you've been thinking of picking it up. Well, there we have it, 21 books to wrap up 2021. I hope you guys all had a really wonderful year, wonderful reading year. I'd love to hear about your top books that you read this year down in the comments below. I'll talk to you guys again soon, and until then, I hope you have a wonderful and magical start to 2022. Bye!